Olá, TUTAMÉIA está ao vivo. E antes de mais nada, nós queremos reafirmar nosso apoio e solidariedade à campanha internacional pela libertação do jornalista Julian Assange, preso político do imperialismo. Aproveitamos também esse momento para mandar nosso abraço carinhoso, nossa solidariedade a todos os familiares, a todo o povo do Rio Grande do Sul que sofre com as enchentes e com a morte que já provocaram a morte de mais de 20 pessoas. Estamos aqui nos nossos estúdios domésticos, a Eleonora, e do outro lado da tela, desde os Estados Unidos, da Universidade de Stanford, fala conosco Jocelyn Smith, que vai ser agora apresentada pela Eleonora e que fará a primeira pergunta.
Jocelyn, thank you so much for being here with us. I will talk in Portuguese to make a presentation about you, and I will ask you the first question. A Jocelyn Smith é da organização Estudantes para a Justiça na Palestina, em Stanford. Ela é uma ativista participando de várias mobilizações nos Estados Unidos em defesa do povo palestino e vai falar conosco agora sobre essa luta que está em dezenas de universidades norte-americanas. Jocelyn, thank you so much. I will first ask you, why can't you show your face, and where are you, and what's going on where you are?
So I am choosing not to disclose my facial identity, even though my name is public, because right now I am currently sitting in the camp. As you can see, there are tents in the background, and we often have a lot of people who try to film us without our consent. And this is something that we are taking very seriously because the school is using these measures and to pursue like potential disciplinary action. We're also taking note of the way that they are suppressing students at other schools, and we just kind of want to make sure that we are very careful and that we protect each other's security and that we keep ourselves safe. And also, I am in the middle of the encampment at White Plaza. I am purposely not showing the students within the encampment, but there are about at least 30 people here with me, off in the front, off in the distance. And I'm in front of that building in the background is like the bookstore. There's more tents. There's like a fountain in the background. Here's our signs. And basically we're in like what's called White Memorial Plaza at Stanford. So it's basically like an open plaza where people can table, where people can meet. It's considered our school's like free. It's considered our school's free speech zone, and that's it's also the center of campus, so it gives us visibility, and that's why we're out here.
So, as I understand, all this students' movement started in Colombia, and how did it ignite the whole United States, and when and why you started this movement in Stanford?
Actually, we had a 120-day long sit-in to stop genocide. It was a pro-Palestinian sit-in that started in October 20th, and it lasted until February 17th, when it was forcibly taken down by administration and police because there was a shooting threat, and they told students to not be outside, that it wasn't safe, and while they were all in their dorms, they took it down, they dismantled it, against the will of the students, and when students were not there. So Columbia and us were in communication before Columbia's sit-in, because obviously students know each other, they're friends, and so they were asking us for tips about how to conduct a potential sit-in or an encampment if they were to start one. But also now that they have started one, we get notes from them. So it's a nice little form of camaraderie and coalition building. And I think as the encampments have grown, there are about maybe 80 or more now. There have been, it's a show of also solidarity and support with the Palestinian cause, but also solidarity with one another and with solidarity against the repression that these students are facing.
So in Stanford, you have done some demonstrations during this movement, the present movement. I'll just show a small video clip, and then I would like you to comment it.
Yeah, that was. Sorry.
Okay, what are the activities of the movement during the day? And you can comment on this demonstration too, please.
Yeah, so rallies are something that, despite their pretty organic nature, they take a lot of organizing and effort, and we need people to speak, like students to speak, and just to make sure to get students to come out and show support. So that rally was something that we've had multiple rallies throughout the school year. This was something that happened after Colombia started their sit-in and after the wave of protests reignited the United States, and that was before the start of this encampment. And then we had a rally that happened last Thursday, right as we launched the encampment this time around. And but yeah, the last sit-in, the 120-day one, was honestly not that well documented because it came at a time where it was pretty unpopular in the United States to be pro-Palestine. We spent a lot of time convincing the people that there was even a genocide in the first place, and also we spent a lot of time convincing people that Israel was an apartheid state. So we didn't get as much coverage from media within the United States as we had hoped, but now that we have reestablished our sit-in, and now that we're deciding to take back the narrative and be like, hey, like, students were caring about this before, it's just that they weren't getting coverage. And also, first and foremost, we stand with the cause for Palestinian liberation, but also we stand with our comrades nationwide as they fight against repression from school administration and from police.
So what you are saying is that now there is a greater consciousness of American people about what's happening in Gaza.
Yes, absolutely.
And why is that? I mean, the news, because we follow, of course, the news in the States, and not always they seem to really portray what's happening. So how this happened? I mean, how this conscious got how this greater consciousness has happened?
I think it's like, because I cannot speak to what is shown on television, for example, in Brazil, but I can say safely, like, in America, a lot of the focus initially that the larger mainstream media was putting forth was on the geopolitical aspect of the conflict. And while that is the most important part of the conflict, because we wouldn't be out here if it weren't for the fight for Palestinian liberation on the ground, we wouldn't be out here. However, Americans have now realized that this is something that students at their universities care very much about, and that they are willing to put their lives on the line for it, and that they are receiving repression for it. And unfortunately, we would have all collectively wished that the American public would have cared about this 6 months ago in the same way that they do now. But there is something, I guess, about these American students protesting and getting repressed and beaten and jailed for it that basically, I guess, touch the hearts of American people and make them see that, you know, if they're receiving repression this hard, then maybe something is very critically wrong.
Jocelyn, how about repression? We have the arrests, we have police violence. What can this movement, how this movement can deal with this growing violence?
I think that I think it's important to frame that a lot of this repression that's been going on has been from police and from Zionists. Most of these schools and these encampments started as part of the initiative called the Popular University for Gaza, or the People's University for Palestine, depending on what you want to call it. And we were being very serious about that in terms of when we said People's University, we meant it. We meant it as a space where people could have alternative programming, could have resources to learn about Palestine, could read books, could go to like these teach-ins taught by students, by professors and whatnot, and receive these lessons, all while having a physical space to show to the universities in America that they want to demand divestment from companies that are invested in Israeli apartheid. However, since these schools saw this as a threat, a lot of them are sending police to repress them, and a lot of them are, like, for example, the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA, there were Zionists that were not even affiliated with the police or the administration that came and harassed the students. So I also think I think the repression is something, the violence is something that comes as a result of the repression and not the protests themselves being inherently violent. And I also think it's important to note that there are ways that repression can happen even if they are not overt. Like, for example, Stanford has covert methods of repression where, like, the last sit-in, for example, they didn't come and arrest us when there was, for example, one night where we had 500 people outside protesting with us and demanding the university to not take legal action against us. They didn't protest then. I mean, they didn't arrest us then. However, they took advantage of a shooting threat to pack up the tents and pack up all of our things at a time where students were not allowed to be outside. That is covert repression. That is something that is not occurring that is not something that is occurring on a broader scale for the world to see, and that is not something that the news can use as a narrative of repression. And right now, the covert method that they're using is utilizing the Office of Community Standards to deliver disciplinary charges to students that they think are involved with these protests. And they have largely been done in a discriminatory fashion because most of this, we have a very broad variety of students of all races and ethnicities and backgrounds here, but they have only been delivering these disciplinary charges to students who are Muslim, Arab, Palestinian, or anti-Zionist Jewish students. And they are going after and targeting these specific identities. And I think also the targeting of, Muslim students at a time where Islamophobia is very high in the US, and also targeting anti-Zionist Jewish students at a time where we're having these larger conversations in the US about what constitutes anti-Semitism within college campuses. Well, in my opinion, would it not be considered anti-Semitism to basically frame these anti-Zionist Jewish students for taking part in a protest, some of which we're not even a part of, and they have just been vocally pro-Palestine before, and basically say that, if your identity and your beliefs do not align with the way that we want it to, then we can give you a disciplinary charge. And we think that's largely unfair and largely discriminatory. And that is but that is something that is not as public as arrests, or that's not something as public as beating students or using physical repression. So we see the strategy that Stanford's been using and how they like to use more under the table methods of repression.
Okay, so what you're saying is that there is like a racist bias in the repression, both the open repression or the under the table repression.
Yes.
And how about the measures that the university are saying that students that are in the protest will be expelled by the university? How can you deal about this menace?
So far, the disciplinary actions that they have enacted quietly to these protesters that they think are involved, or people who weren't even protesters that they just think were involved, the measures that they are using are unclear, and we're not exactly sure to what degree they are going to punish these students, or they're trying to punish these students. And we think also having clarity on the types of punishments that can occur for these types of political activity would be best, and they are not being very clear about it. They are being very intentionally vague. As a matter of fact, the letter that all of the students received was the exact same. And they basically sentenced them with a variety of potential of potential like breaking school rules, like a variety of rules that they have potentially broken, but it was impossible for any singular student to have broken all of those at once. So they were being very vague about it, and we have been seeing and keeping a close eye on our comrades who have been expelled, you know, across the nation. But we even with the charges being unclear, we have a strong show of community support from within Stanford and outside of Stanford, asking that Stanford drop these charges and that they are unjust and that they are infringing on our rights to free speech.
So Columbia, both Columbia and UCLA called the police on the students.
Mm-hmm.
And other universities had other repression measures. What does this say about the freedom of speech and the academic freedom in the USA and democracy in the USA?
Yeah, I think that political cartoon is an excellent way to describe it, actually, because it's freedom of speech, but to whom? And this is a question that, you know, we also came across on campus during the last 120-day sit-in, because that at that 2 weeks after that sit-in came about, so it was like maybe in November, a group of Zionist students wanted to start their own tent because they saw that we were getting attention from Stanford students. And they would abandon their tent at night. They would not watch after it. So it was not a sit-in, it was just an informational tent. And yet the school never collected their stuff. They never took their stuff away, and they would let them come back to it in the morning. However, on the day where we were in February 17th, where we were not allowed to be in White Plaza, we were not allowed to be outside because of the shooting threat, the administrators called the police to collect all of our stuff quietly and discreetly. So it's basically, we've noticed that when it comes to this free speech in the United States, there is a double standard. And we ask the question of, when you say free speech to whom, and who is allowed to have it? And when people who believe in certain things, such as the Palestinian cause for liberation, utilize their free speech, at what cost will it come? You know, how will we be repressed as a result? And all of these are questions that we are trying to ask the university, and ask that they answer in good faith and not try to use some, like, utilize some disciplinary action or utilize some type of under the table covert operation in order to extract out of us.
Okay. What can you tell us about the participation of Jewish students in these demonstrations? We've seen several demonstrations, especially in New York City, of the Jewish people, Jewish Voice for Liberation, Jewish Voice for peace, also in Europe. And is this happening also in the students' movement, or just the Zionists are attacking?
I actually think that we have a solid presence of anti-Zionist Jewish students at every single college across the nation. Stanford just established their Jewish Voice for Peace branch, their branch of Jewish Voice for Peace, and they've been collaborating with us for activities at this encampment, and even at the old encampment, we had anti-Zionist Jewish students there, and also some of the students that were delivered these disciplinary actions were anti-Zionist Jewish students. And matter of fact, the only, not to play into identity politics, but the only white students who were given these disciplinary action charges were anti-Zionist Jewish students. So we have, like, they have made it clear to us that they don't feel welcome in a lot of these Zionist spaces on campus, and that they feel that because of their political ideology, they don't feel welcome. But in places like this encampment, and like the last one, that they've been able to feel a sense of community and be welcomed for their Jewishness the way they are. Some Stanford Zionists have told them that, for example, oh, you're not Jewish if you don't support the state of Israel, or you're not Jewish if you are not Zionist. And we are here to tell them that that's not the case, and that they are always welcome here with us, and that the only person who can tell them what their religious ties and affiliations are is themselves.
And could you tell us a bit about the demands of the movement? The divest. I mean, the university cut their ties to economical ties to Israel, or companies that support Israel. Tell us a bit about this, and how are the negotiations going, if any? We know Brown University had a kind of agreement with the students. How is this going on nationwide? And it's Stanford, of course.
Yeah, so I think one thing that unites all of these student movements across the nation is the call for divestment and transparency. Divestment from, and obviously each university is different in terms of what companies that they invest in, that those companies then invest in the Israeli apartheid structure or work with the Israeli apartheid structure. But the main calls are divestment and also for transparency of their investment portfolio. I can't speak for other schools necessarily, but I know Amnesty International once wrote a report, either 2022 or 2023, that graded all of these major schools' investment portfolios and their ability to access their investment portfolios, and they gave Stanford a failing grade. They said that they were not able to access any of it. They were not able to find out what Stanford invested in, and there is no transparency there. And that is something that is important to a lot of students, whether or not they even care about the Palestinian cause for liberation, because they want to know where their money is going. And we have found that the overwhelming majority of students on this campus support divestment. The associate student body actually just passed a statement of divestment, and this is something that we are going to be showing the wider university. Yes, exactly that post. Thank you so much. That was saying that we were going to show the university and basically say that, hey, about 74% of the students on this campus, like of the students who voted, support a cause for divestment, and they support divestment that aligns with the boycott, divest, and sanctions movement, and they support the cause for divestment from the three main targets of the divestment coalition, which are Chevron, HP, HP being Hewlett Packard, and Lockheed Martin. And, one may ask, and the school may ask this question, well, if our investment holdings are not transparent, how do you know which companies we are working with and invested in? And that is because Chevron and Lockheed Martin are what are called industrial affiliates, meaning that they work with laboratories on campus, they recruit from students on campus, they fund a lot of the research, and they share materials, and they basically are strongly affiliated with a lot of the research, especially for aerospace engineering, and for environmental sciences. That would be Chevron. So we are asking that divestment include disavowalment from these industrial affiliates. And we also ask, for example, as with Hewlett Packard, that they fully divest from these systems that we believe are strong proponents of Israeli apartheid. And we actually have proposals that are being written up in a more formalized structure, because we know a lot of these universities might say, well, you're protesting and whatnot, but have you ever tried writing a proposal, or have you ever tried writing XYZ? And we're here to say that, yes, we are. And we can do two things at once. As the Americans say, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. And this space that we are in serves as a public display of support for divestment, whereas the divestment coalition, Stanford Against Apartheid in Palestine, represents like the more formalized structure and ability to write out these demands and write out these proposals in a more formalized way, so that the university can be shown on multiple fronts, both physical and ideological, that students are in support of divestment overwhelmingly.
And what can you tell us about the political discussions among the students? I mean, you of course are discussing divestment and all this, and the Gaza situation, but what about other issues? I mean, geopolitical issues, or climate or the climate situation. The New York Times today has a thing about this. They say it's not just Gaza. The students protesters see links to a global struggle. What can you tell us about this?
Yeah, I think as protesters, although we recognize the need to focus our efforts and do what we need to do, like, you know, each of us are only one people, and we try to do what we can. However, we recognize that this struggle for Palestine is huge. It is so much more important like than just what it seems to be. All of these struggles are interwoven, and all of these struggles are intertwined. And for example, United States Police. This is also a report that is written by Amnesty International. United States Police has trained with the Israeli military, with the Israeli Defense Forces. And then, as we know, the United States military and police then come back and repress folks within the United States. They repress folks based on skin color and race, and they repress students who are protesting against these means. So, United States clearly has this link with Israel. They also fund a lot of their electronics. The U.S. the U.S. has spent billions of dollars on aid to Israel, and they are basically an extension of the U.S. military structure. Um, and I think it's important to see that when we are thinking about how the U.S. decides to use Israel as one giant military base so that they can operate in the rest of the Middle East and utilize Israel as their base, this affects so much more than just Israel. And this so much affects so much more than just Palestine and Palestinians. Um, and also the issue about climate change. You know, the U.S. military is one of the world's biggest polluters, and yet war and deploying war in this situation allows the U.S. to gain more money because the U.S. makes money off of war, but the people that continue to suffer are the people that suffer the most at the hands of climate change, and the people that are in the global south and that live in these places that are rapidly warming and that are going through rapid fluctuations within the climate. And all of that is linked to the ways that the US spends and expends serious amounts of money on the military and their very wasteful, environmentally harmful practices. So I think that this Palestinian cause for liberation is such an important gateway for people to understand how so many of these struggles are intertwined, and how US imperialism is such an arm for oppression globally.
Jocelyn, since the Vietnam War, this is the most important movement in the States. Why, and what do you expect the continuation of this protests?
We expect that, you know, these protests have become a turning point, and hopefully, you know, we continue to see people continuing to mobilize and understanding how the struggle doesn't stop here. And, you know, even if we see a liberated Palestine tomorrow, you know, God willing, we would still have other things to fight for and other measures of liberations to fight for. So the struggle doesn't end here, and the struggle doesn't even start here. This is something that has been ongoing and will continue to be ongoing. And, you know, even like, for example, with the Vietnam War, that's also interlinked, right? Like, that was such a time when the US was starting to build up their imperialistic cause and setting up their military strategies overseas in ways that were far more invasive and on the ground. So I think that this is something that will agitate and wake up the American people in a very, hopefully, long-term and sustainable way.
Great. I wonder if you say, like, every day give to the people that are in the movement news about what's happening in Gaza. I would like now just to show some numbers, and I'll speak in Portuguese, and then I'd like you to comment about them, about the deaths that are going on and all the destruction. Eu estou apresentando agora boletim divulgado pela Embaixada da Palestina no Uruguai. Esse é o boletim mais recente divulgado, foi divulgado ontem à noite, então o boletim do dia 1º de maio, dá conta que já são mais de 34.550 pessoas assassinadas. Dessas, 14.100 são crianças, 9.200 mulheres e 1.049 idosos. Como já essa parece ser uma guerra contra as mulheres e contra as crianças, uma guerra perpetrada por Israel contra as mulheres e contra as crianças palestinas. So I brought some numbers of the deaths and the situation in Gaza. I would like you to comment this and also tell us about how you update the people with news about what's going on there in Gaza.
Yeah, I think obviously, I think the biggest thing we should uplift, and the biggest thing that I think all of these student movements are trying to uplift within the Palestinian cause for liberation, is that we would not be here and fighting if they also weren't fighting for their own liberation. And we give glory to their martyrs always. There are estimated to be minimum 34,000 people dead, and that doesn't even count for all the people under the rubble that they haven't been able to unearth. And I think as this space is a place for us to uplift liberation, we also, mourn the deaths that have happened. And we seek to educate people because it is the people's university. The whole point is education. We keep people grounded in the facts of why we're here and why we do what we do. And I think, keeping us also grounded in the fact that this genocide is ongoing, and that just because maybe the media narrative is shifting towards student repression, it doesn't mean the repression in Gaza itself has stopped. And that this is something we always need to uplift, and we always need to center our attention towards the first reason as to why we're out here in the first place.
Jocelyn, what is the effect of this movement in the presidential election in November? What do you believe it's going to happen? And this movement will cause any effect in the election?
We have seen that the polls are not in favor of any candidate at the moment. More people are voting independently and are voting without a two-party affiliation, aka without voting Democrat or Republican, than they have in a long time. And this shows a greater dissatisfaction with the two-party dichotomy that we have going on, and people feel like those are not serving the interests of the people, and that those are not serving the interests of liberation. And although that has been a position that many of us have held for years, and that has been a position that that people who within the United States have been fighting for liberation movements, like that is a position people have held arguably since the inception of the United States. More people seem to be waking up to that now more than ever. People are being able to watch as this genocide is live streamed onto their phones. People are being able to watch as reporters from Gaza show them, this is what your tax money is funding. This is what your tax money as Americans are funding, this death, this destruction. And people are dissatisfied with how the American political system only seeks to fund that and does not want to divest.
Jocelyn, can you please tell us a bit more about your group, the Students for Justice in Palestine? When did it start? What it does generally? I mean, tell us a bit about this group and about what do you think can happen now. You think the students are thinking about creating like say a national committee to oversee all the movements or to plan together, to plan national actions?
Yeah, so Students for Justice in Palestine is an American-based organization that serves about 350 different chapters, I think, minimum. And the student movement for liberation of Palestine, I'm just kind of reading off of their website, first began in the 1950s through the formation of the General Union for Palestine Students. And then in the 90s, that is when it kind of formed into what we call Students for Justice in Palestine. And so each university will have their own chapter, and Stanford has their own chapter, and that's currently what we use.
So what about a come together of all the movements or all the directions of the movements, say, from California to New York?
Yeah, so I think it also is important context, I guess. It may be helpful to also understand that National Students for Justice in Palestine put out a call for this this popular university for Gaza narrative, or the People's University for Palestine. And they just put out this call to action that encouraged students to like use alternative modes of programming to occupy space, to basically take back the university and use it as a way to push for divestment and to push for investment transparency. And each individual Students for Justice in Palestine, or as we call it for short, SJP, each individual SJP chapter has sought to answer that call in a variety of different ways, and many of those sought to answer through encampment. And we also would like to reiterate that while a lot of the news around it in the US positions it as solidarity with Columbia or solidarity with, you know, a specific university, Columbia themselves have reiterated that all of this and all of us and what we're standing for as a nation, as students who are comrades within the nation, are doing it for the cause for Palestinian liberation first and foremost. And we seek to uplift that cause no matter what.
Great. Jocelyn, we would like to thank you very much for your participation here in TUTAMÉIA and in this interview. And a gente também quer agradecer a participação do público que se formou aqui para acompanhar essa entrevista. A gente está querendo trazer as coisas da forma mais novas, grandes novidades do que estão acontecendo nos Estados Unidos, nesse momento dos estudantes. Lembramos a todos que essa entrevista fica disponível em todos os canais TUTAMÉIA. Busque por TUTAMÉIA TV e você nos encontra nas várias plataformas de podcast, no Twitter, no Facebook, no YouTube. No YouTube, não deixe de se inscrever no nosso canal e clicar na sinetinha para receber avisos de novos vídeos. Participe também do grupo Amigos do TUTAMÉIA, no WhatsApp. O link para o seu ingresso nesse grupo está na descrição deste vídeo. E agora, antes do boa noite, do tchauzinho, a gente volta a palavra para Jocelyn. And now, Jocelyn, we'll give you, the floor is yours again, so that you can send your, no questions now, just your message, whatever you want to say to the people that are with us now, and that will be with us along the internet. Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much for allowing me to be on your show and for interviewing me. I think this is such an important outlet for us to reach people, not only within the US, but internationally. And I would like to reiterate our main objectives just in a short summary list for people to understand. So number one, first and foremost, we stand with the cause for Palestinian liberation. We uplift our martyrs, we uplift our liberators on the ground. And second of all, we stand with our comrades across the nation as they fight against police repression and administrative repression and Zionist repression, as they fight for divestment and for and uplift liberation. And we also, the third thing is that we are asking ourselves from Stanford divestment from companies that are invested in Israeli apartheid and transparency of the investment portfolio. And as this disciplinary process is going out, we ask that they drop these disciplinary charges. This is something that the greater Stanford community is also asking, and that people outside of the Stanford community are also asking of them to put pressure on them. And yes, those are our main 4 points that I think I'd like to sum up, and I would just like to thank you all for letting me be on the show.
Thank you so much, Jocelyn.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Have a nice day.
You as well.
Tchau,
Thank you so
pessoal.
much.
Tchau.
Tchau.